Hello, thank you for joining us today to discuss EMC's IT transformation study. Every year we have a series of events across EMEA called forums, which attract IT decision makers, technical architects and so on. This year we decided to survey them, and we surveyed 6,600 people from 22 countries. The survey findings have been fascinating. For example, businesses are no longer in retrenchment. The opposite, they are looking to drive growth. IT is not just a cost centre anymore, but it's a strategic tool being used as a lever by businesses to proactively go for growth. Many businesses identified new product development as their top priority for 2013 going forward, and big data and cloud are definitely the technologies that seem to be gaining traction in the coming years, and there's definitely room for growth there too. I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to Adrian McDonald today, who is the president of EMEA, working with customers day in, day out, understands the marketplace very well. So it'll be interesting to get his insights into our research results. Hi Adrian, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stella.
The research brought up some very interesting findings. Obviously it was over 22 countries across EMEA, the area that you manage.
Right.
One of the questions we asked them was around their business priorities for 2013.
Right.
65% said that their business priorities were either revenue generation or product development.
Right.
Does that surprise you at all?
It really does. There are a few key parts to this survey, I think, that are telling. One reflects the complete change and transformation of IT within the businesses that they support. In fact, support might be the wrong word. Traditionally, IT has been a cost centre.
Yes.
Traditionally, it's been a way of just providing more automation to the businesses. That is changing fundamentally. So we're still trying to drive out costs from our business, but there's a very, very big change into IT being a or the fundamental change agent for agility, and a or the fundamental change agent around business generation and customer experience. So that was borne out in the survey, and is certainly borne out in meetings I have with the CIOs and CFOs of EMEA.
Yes. And do you think that's why nearly 60% of businesses are saying that they are transforming their IT functions over the next year or two?
I think there's a number of things coming together. Firstly, we've had a big change in the business environment, particularly in the Eurozone and the UK over the last 3-4 years, and that originally had people focus on cost. Likewise, there's a very big change in what's possible in IT. You might say IT 3.0, for example.
Yes.
And basically, to be competitive, you have to get to the new IT environment, the new things that are possible before everyone else.
How do you do that?
I mean, so what? There's a race to change,
yes,
you might say. So what are people doing? The challenge of the new environments, the challenge of cloud, the challenge of big data is, number one, it provides you more choice. Number two, it provides you the opportunity to drive out cost immensely per unit of IT that you use.
Yep.
So the challenge then for everyone is three key subjects. Number one, everyone we deal with has to standardize fundamentally more than they ever have before, which changes many of the business processes and how they look at IT thus far. Secondly, virtualization across the business, which traditionally has been a server-based subject.
Yep.
But it's now, you have to virtualize storage completely, you have to virtualize network completely, and the application completely. So ultimately what we're doing is we're separating business applications from their physical infrastructure, which is making many, many new things possible. And that's creating this dynamic in the market of change.
Yes.
And lastly, the bigger subject of all is that you have to automate everything at scale.
Yes.
So we can't continue in an environment which is heavily manually driven. We have to automate processes fundamentally more, and we have the technology to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, you might say, a platform enabling the possibility for change, and there's a race to get to these new technologies as quickly as we can, and that's certainly reflected in these surveys.
Yeah, and what was also interesting was, even with this automation, cloud technologies and big data technologies, the survey believes, 77% of the survey believes that it will create new roles and responsibilities going forward.
Right.
How do you see that happening with this increased automation?
Well, let me boil it down. I think that the way that companies are defining themselves is changing. And most interestingly for me recently, I've begun to see a trend in retail, for example. The same is playing out in transport, the same is playing out in many other industries. But in retail, traditionally, IT was at the bottom of the stack in terms of how money got invested. And it was just there to drive down costs.
Yeah.
And basically, the number one conversation you'd have with retailers was, look, guys, we sell cornflakes, we sell porridge, and we sell it more cheaply than the other guy.
Yeah.
So you need to support us in that, which means IT should be cheap, above everything else. That's fundamentally changed. A major UK retailer, if not the major UK retailer, this week alone came to me and said for the first time, our budgets are up 40%, and it's all about customer experience. So, the business, of course, is not just a bricks and mortar experience anymore. It's a digital online experience. It's home shopping. Some of these retailers are now banks. They're now in the car business. They're now in many other businesses. And so it's increasingly a digital customer experience that they compete with, not just on price per se. Very big change, and I think it's a good example of some of the changes that happen in the industry. I was told by one transport company recently that if they had to save money, they'd sell the planes, but they'd invest in the IT organisation going forward.
Yes.
So, finance, the same thing. What is a bank?
Yes.
A bank is a brand and a factory. What is retail? Increasingly, it's a brand and a factory, and the factory increasingly is IT. So these are very, very big changes, and then once that's known, how do I do that? Well, I need cloud, possibly the most overused word in IT today. What does cloud mean for most people? It actually, to some degree, it means using the public cloud. For most big organizations, actually not so much.
Yeah.
It's much more about using cloud-type principles to create hybrid or internal clouds to reduce the cost of service provision, but massively increase the agility whilst increasing security going forward. So it's really a cost and agility play going forward.
Okay, so we've talked about cloud. Just thinking about big data for a second.
Right.
Nearly half the survey, 47%, think that big data deployment is going to create the new winners and losers in those industries. Right. 1 in 10 are already deploying it. Does that surprise you?
It's stunning, quite frankly. So there are some industries which have always been IT. Online gaming, for example, is and many other areas are purely an IT go-to-market. But increasingly, all other businesses now are looking for that edge. Yeah. And ultimately, if they know more about their customers than anyone else does, they win.
Yes.
That's the definition. So
it's about that inside knowledge.
And that was just,
gem of information.
I would say it could have been the #1 subject during those 22 forums, was how do I gain that edge? How do I gain more knowledge about my customer than anyone else, or my citizen than anyone else? Yeah. And so the fact that 77% have said this is, we're going to have to change them or add some responsibilities in these areas. 47% said it's a winners and losers game in the market, and 10% are already doing it, which means they've already deployed the tools, they've already employed the data scientists, this brand new category of people that's going to help us develop our economies and add to employment going forward. Massive changes called out by the survey.
That begs the question of security here. Obviously, that's lots of information in the cloud, lots of information about us on databases and so on. 77% are very concerned still about security. Yep,
and they should be.
Right.
It's the elephant in the room as such of digital commerce today, and I would say that in terms of how that subject's been discussed so far, I'd use an iceberg analogy. What we've discussed so far is the bit above the surface. The amount of attacks that are going on today is the bit that's below. We are seeing unprecedented levels of security threat, and every CIO and CEO and CFO I talk to recognises that and needs answers. And they aren't necessarily talking about that publicly, for a number of understandable reasons. This is the big dependency, and going back to one of my earlier comments, as long as security, #1, business continuance and compliance are all dealt with, which they are not today, so people need help in those areas. If those three are taken to one side, then it's a cost and agility game. But security is the one thing that you have to get fixed, or nothing else counts.
Yeah, fundamental.
Fundamental building block.
We've talked a lot about big data today.
Yeah.
Would it surprise you to learn that Western Europe was actually behind Eastern Europe in considering and deploying these technologies? So 24% of businesses say that they are looking at it or deploying it in Western Europe, compared to 40% in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, again, I'd say some key areas have come out of the survey. To recap, IT, the retrenchment of IT is over.
Yeah.
People moving to transform IT at pace. The dependence upon security has been key. And then, really interestingly, the geographical divergence and how people are getting to the new agendas. And we saw in this survey a big difference between what have been called the emerging markets and what have traditionally been called the developed markets.
Yeah.
And in essence, those terms are going to change. We're going to end up calling developed economies emerging economies at this rate, because the higher scores for all the change agendas and all the spending agendas were always in emerging economies.
Wow.
Middle East, big spending, forward thinking.
Yes.
Russia, big spending, forward thinking. Africa, big spending, forward thinking. West Europe, we're only 24%. I see in some of these change agendas in certain countries, and we can call out, Italy, Sweden, Germany, for example, where maybe some of the cost agendas have taken more precedence or more mind share than actually the risk of not changing quickly enough.
Yes.
I think there's a warning here for West Europe about getting the focus back to growth, getting the focus back to growth agendas, which is driven by some of this phenomenal change and development in IT.
So we talk about industries having winners and losers from big data. It could be countries.
It could be entire regions,
Yeah.
and that's one of the potential outcomes of the survey.
Adrian, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.